Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Stinchfield. The response to the officer-involved accidental shooting of a suspect resisting arrest in Minneapolis will tell you all you need to know about America and where we stand as a nation. Our rights are under attack. Common sense has been thrown out the window. The ability to reason is no longer evident in far too many communities, and sadly, law and order appears to be a thing of the past in these liberal cities. Beyond the disgusting and dangerous behavior of rioters and looters, the behavior of elected so-called leaders may be the most telling of how far we have fallen as a nation.
Folks will keep dying if we don't fully address racial injustice and inequities in our country, from implicit bias to broken systems.
But when you look at Minneapolis, that's not what this killing is about. The audio makes it clear it was an accident, which makes Kamala Harris's comments solely about pushing more racial division. Plus, Dante Wright, the suspect who was killed, resisted arrest. He kicked and fought with officers in a violent attempt to flee. He did not comply with officers' respectful requests to do so. He had a warrant out for evading arrest and weapons possession, yet the media ignores all of that. The Democrats ignore it. So let's be clear. This case isn't about race or injustice. It is about police training and the need for suspects to comply with officers' commands. Kamala Harris knows this, making her comments reckless because they only embolden the lawbreakers. The officer involved, a 20-year veteran, deserves fairness, even after she apparently admitted she made a mistake. It's tragic. We call all of this due process, and it is a fundamental right in America, the right to plead your case before judgment is passed. But for cop-hating Democrats, for race baiters, due process apparently should never be afforded to, of course, white cops.
I do fully support releasing the officer of her duties.
All employees working for the City of Brooklyn Center are entitled to due process with respect to discipline. This employee will receive due process, and that's really all that I can say.
All right, you see that? What you just watched was a disagreement between the mayor and the city manager over not just employee policy, but also the founder's vision of fundamental rights entitled to us as human beings. Well, all of it sparked this tweet from Brooklyn Center's mayor. And it reads, effective immediately, our city manager has been relieved of his duties. You see, comply also means agreement. The liberal mayor fires the city manager because he wants to let the investigation play out and give his employee a right to defend herself. That, too, tells you all you need to know about the so-called tolerance of the left and their lack of respect for the Constitution. Folks, this is Joe Biden's America. The police chief, of course, promptly resigned. So did the officer involved in the shooting. How can you stay on the job when Democrats are calling for your head while pushing for the complete defunding and dismantling of police across the country? I want you to take a look at this. These are actual tweets about police from sitting Democrat members of Congress. Here's Representative Alanna Presley. From slave patrols to traffic stops, we can't reform this. How about America-hating Congresswoman Ilhan Omar? This violence is a basic part of police interactions with communities of color. Here's Michigan's own left-wing loon, Rashida Tlaib. I am done with those who condone government-funded murder. No more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It can't be reformed, she writes there. Slave patrols? Government-funded murder? If they really want to save lives in these communities, how about you train the community to obey police and stop resisting? You do that, you got a 100% survival rate, I promise you. See, the left needs to acknowledge the tragedy of this deadly mistake. Was it about race? Instead, they exploit the grief, They exploit the pain and suffering, and they use it to rile their base. So as we watch the riots continue, sitting members of Congress want to do away with policing and incarceration, while we watch the unraveling of society. Their solution is to do the most dangerous thing they can do. It is the most dangerous people in America that they want to let out of prison and put them back on the streets, while at the same time do away with the brave men and women willing to protect us from evil. All the while, let's add this in, they're pushing to disarm all of us. I don't need to tell you this. This is all a recipe for disaster. So as we prepare for another night of what could be more violence, I would not be shocked if it comes when the sun goes down. I want to welcome now Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County, Arizona, and former Sheriff of Milwaukee County and Newsmax contributor David Clark. Sheriff Lamb, Sheriff Clark, great to have you both on the program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Glad to be here.
So, Sheriff Clark, let me start with you. Reimagine policing, they say. What in the world is that supposed to mean?
Doesn't mean anything. Look, this is what the Democrats do in situations like this with police use of force. They demagogue the issue. Harris and Presley jumped all over this like a chicken on a June bug. You know, there's still a long way to go in this investigation, but some facts and circumstances and evidence are emerging where we can see a picture starting to develop here. I wouldn't sit here and look into this camera and say that this was a mistake if it wasn't, all right? A mistake in the legal sense. And what that means in the legal sense is it's a defense to prosecution, meaning if it negates the state of mind necessary to commit that crime, then it's a mistake and it's a defense to prosecution. This officer was in a situation that was tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. When that happens, oftentimes your cognitive thinking collapses, and so you're just reacting to circumstances. She grabbed the wrong thing, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, this was not about race, clearly listening to her audio there. Sheriff Lamb, you know, we say, I've talked to you about this, you fall back to your lowest, or you fall back to your lowest level of training, right? And so that's where you are here. And so for the left to exploit this, though, and make this about race and loot and steal and talk about no more incarceration, can I ask you, what would your community look like in Pinal County if they took all your deputies off the street and let everybody out of prison?
It'd be a disaster, just like all these other leftist cities where they've done this. The fact of the matter is, it is shameful that these politicians would take advantage of such a tragic situation. This is tragic for that young man. Even though he was wanted for aggravated robbery, they were using appropriate force. He got back in his car. Mind you, and we have to have this tough conversation. This is what we do in law enforcement. And that conversation is, and you mentioned it earlier, had he just complied, he might have gone to jail for the night, maybe a few days, but he would have been out. We would not have had this result. He put those officers in a position where they had to make a split-second decision. Like Sheriff Clark said, they made that decision. She was wrong. She made a mistake. And she's going to have to live with that. It's tragic for her as well. But the fact that these politicians would use this to divide us as a community, as Americans, is shameful. They should be bringing us together saying, hey, this was an accident. This was clearly not based on race. And one more thing, Grant, I challenge any one of these politicians to show me the facts that support bias in law enforcement, where we make our decisions or black people are being killed on a daily basis as they would have you believe. Show me those science facts, and then we can have a conversation. But right now they're playing on Americans' emotion and they're trying to divide us, and that is dangerous.
Well, Sheriff Lamb, I'll tell you, when it comes to facts, officer-involved shootings where they kill the suspect, 50% of those suspects killed are white, 25% are black. So those facts just don't add up there. Sheriff Clark, you and I have talked about this war on cops. I'm worried for officers and sheriff's deputies out there that they will be hesitant because they are so afraid of making a mistake and what will happen to them and their communities burn because of something like this.
And as a result, crime is up in a lot of these cities. I know it's up in Minneapolis. Homicides this year, 14 versus 8 at this time last year. That's an increase. And by the way, there was a 20-year-old a black male that was shot and killed in a shooting near a Minneapolis mall last night. No outrage, no riots. And I'll tell you right now, the people who are out there rioting and making the most noise, if Mr. Wright would have been shot in a drive-by shooting or in a drug deal gone bad, these people wouldn't have batted an eyelash about it. They wouldn't have given a damn. This is full outrage. This rioting is untenable. And at some point, because I think we're reaching a tipping point, Grant, and you know this, at some point, the cops are just going to throw their hands up. They'll stay on the job. They'll throw their hands up, and they'll look the other way on this stuff, and that's going to be bad news for America.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm seeing is when departments have leaders like you, Sheriff Clark, and you, Sheriff Lamb, they're keeping their officers because they know they have leadership has their backs. Many of these liberal cities are losing officers. Sheriff Lamb, I just want to ask you before we go. I got word tonight that the officer that shot Jacob Blake, you may remember this case in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This was the guy with the knife. He's going around. They tase him. He gets back up. They paralyze him. That officer cleared of any wrongdoing. All the officers cleared of wrongdoing. Back on the job. Do you worry, lastly, Sheriff Lamb, now what's going to happen in Kenosha, Wisconsin, another area prime and ripe for riots?
Yeah, I do worry because you have politicians kind of basically fueling this fire for people to go out and oppose us and oppose the rule of law. We need our politicians. We need our leaders in this country. We need leaders first and foremost, courageous leaders, but we need them to start supporting the rule of law. What happens in Kenosha affects us throughout the country, in Arizona, and all over the place. And could be dangerous for all of us. I'm just appreciative that you're coming on and talking about it because we have to stand together against these things.
Well, the feeling is mutual, fellas. I'm appreciative of both of you for being strong voices for law enforcement, and it's so important at times like this. Sheriff Mark Lamb, great to see you. Sheriff David Clark, great to see you too as well. We'll look forward to getting you both back on soon. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man.
Welcome.
All right. So as we prepare for another night of rioting in Minneapolis, and who knows, maybe Kenosha, Wisconsin now, surrounding counties have put in place a 10 p.m. curfew following last night's unrest. For a live update on what's happening there, I want to check in with my buddy James Klug. He is a reporter on the ground in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. James, what's happened? I see people gathering behind you. What are you expecting tonight?
Well, so far right now, we have about 300 protesters right out front of the Brooklyn Center Police Department. Most are dressed in black bloc, which is black all the way down, head to toe with faces covered. There's also Black Lives Matter groups here as well. Right before, maybe about an hour ago, we had dozens of National Guard vehicles that are arriving on the scene. They have all hands on deck tonight.
All right. Well, I know you're there, and I know you keep us posted, buddy. Stay safe. Hopefully, the bad, I call it foul weather, will keep people away. It often does in times like this. But as you said, 300 people already out there. James Klug, again, stay safe. Keep us posted. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. So Joe Biden claims his, quote, infrastructure plan will give us an edge over China, except a major part of that plan actually makes Joe Biden's Chinese friends wildly rich while giving them control over America. We'll break that one down coming up. But first, what is in the Georgia voting law that is so offensive to liberals? The reality is they don't even know. Watch as they are put to the test.
Does this legislation I just read off to you sound like Jim Crow on steroids?
No, I guess not.